Let's take a look at this. And I think this will really be just an extension of what we've really already heard this morning. So 2 Samuel chapter 9, remember that the Old Testament is really a picture form of the New Testament. The New Testament explains in detail what these stories are trying to convey to us. And we're going to see this very powerful vignette now in David's life. David, who has become a picture of Jesus Christ, and this particular story of how he deals with us as Jesus deals with us in this world. 2 Samuel 9, now David said, is there anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? David and Jonathan made a covenant years ago. Jonathan saw that he was going to be king, so he said, please show kindness to me and my household when you rise to the throne. Because in that day in the Middle East, whenever there would be an exchange of regimes, you would wipe out anybody from the opposition's family. So just keep that in mind. And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, who made a clear drink. Is that what it was? Ziba, is that what it's called, Ziba?
Zima.
Oh, what is that? What is it?
Like a wine cooler.
Oh, wine cooler. That's too weak. I shouldn't try this after what just happened. I'm tired. And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, at your service. Then the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? Because God had just showed David kindness. David said, I'll build you a house. God said, no, I'm making a house out of you, referring to his messianic lineage to Jesus Christ. And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet. So the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel in Lodabar. Lodabar means wasteland. It means no pasture in Hebrew. Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel in Lodabar. Now when Mephibosheth, his name means shameful one, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face, prostrated himself. Then David answered Mephibosheth, and he answered, here is your servant. So David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. Then he bowed himself and said, what is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as me? In other words, I'm useless. And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table and was lame in both his feet. David is the only character in the Bible that is referred to by God as a man after God's own heart. And we see it come to a climax here. He's at his very best here. He's looking most like Christ here in his desire to give kindness to those who don't deserve it. That's what grace is. God's riches at Christ's expense, if you want that acronym. But in this story, what we're going to see, and we'll do this briefly, we're going to break it down into 3 points. We're going to see a searching king, we're going to see an ancient love, and we're going to see an unending feast. We're going to see a searching king, an ancient love, and an unending feast. First, the searching king. Here is this Christ-like figure, David, longing to be kind and forgiving to his enemy. This man deserved nothing but death. He never acknowledged David's rule. And really our ability, this is for our instruction, by the way, 1 Corinthians 10 tells us this, for our admonition, our ability to love, to be Christ-like and have real power from heaven is it's linked to our readiness really to love and forgive our enemies and difficult people. And to not avoid difficult people, but to lift them up, to help bring out the best in these people. So David's first act as king over the entirety of Israel now is to search out his enemies for the purpose of loving them. This boy is from Saul, who made himself David's enemy. Saul's dead now. Jonathan's dead. He's Jonathan's son, whom David made a covenant with. His name is Shameful One, and the reason he's lame is because of a fall. In 2 Samuel chapter 4, when they found out that Saul was dead, one of the nurses came, picked him up when he was 5, began to run with him, and he fell. And it crippled him in both legs. Therefore, he can't walk properly. He's dwelling, look at this picture of you and I. We're crippled because of a fall. We can't walk properly. We're enemies of the king. We've been told all our lives that David's the one that's responsible for this, that God's the one at fault, that David hated your father, hated your grandfather, and we have been made afraid of God. This is this incredible picture of humanity. You see, and here it is. Here is mankind, this picture of mankind, descendant of royalty, meant for the throne, meant for glory, a fallen race, humiliated, impoverished, in fear of the genuine king, with crushed dreams, a devastated family, and death everywhere. A picture of us dwelling in a world that was meant to be a paradise but is devastated by a fall. It has become a wasteland, and it's an amazing thing here because you'll see, one of the things I want you to see, atheism is gaining so much ground in our society today. And the bedrock of atheism is the existence of evil. They have a trilemma. There's evil in the world. Then how can God be good and sovereign and allow evil in the world? They have a trilemma. That is their thinking, you see. How can you believe in God with all of this insanity taking place? And one of the ways that God deals with this is he deals with, if you would, these things. Contrast is the mother of clarity, okay? To understand what something is, you oftentimes have to tell what it is not. And you have this story in John 11 where Lazarus, his good friend, Jesus' good friend, is going to die. And he says, let's wait for 4 days because this is not unto death. I want to do something bigger for you than just healing somebody. I want to do a resurrection. I want to show you the kind of power I have. I want to show you what my heart is genuinely for people. And it shows Jesus there as he looks at evil and he looks at death, and it shows him snorting. Literally snorting like a war horse and angry at death. He's furious at death. And he just yells a command out, come out, Lazarus, you see. And you see, what happens is that we live in a society where people like the German philosopher Schopenhauer said, when he looked at evil, the world should never have been. Can you feel the hell of that? Can you feel the hell of saying the world should never have existed? Or Samuel Beckett said, existence is the era. Existence is the era. But you see, the gospel says that the world once was otherwise. And the king is coming back to restore it to its glory, including mankind. Remember, the Father and the Son and the Spirit created a beautiful, perfect, harmonized world, and now this is a diseased, war-torn wasteland called Lodabar. And we see first this searching king, Jesus, if you would, searching our greatest enemy to destroy it, death. You see Jesus here is like a relentless detective hunting down a serial killer called death, a cosmic Jack the Ripper, and one day he's going to corner him on the cross. and swallow death up with his own death. That'll make your mind spin. And here we are in Lodabar. And what does David do? A picture of Jesus? He sends his unnamed servant, the Holy Spirit, into the highways and the byways. Isn't there anybody that'll come? I'm throwing a feast. Does it sound familiar? Invite them. Everybody had an excuse. Then get the lame, the halt, and the crippled and bring them in. If you don't see the gospel in this chapter, you're mental. That's a theological term for crazy. But you see, there's something in me that leads me to believe that God has to reach down further to other people than he did for me. And it's important, one of the first things about the gospel to know that by nature, you are a crippled, dead dog in nowhere land. And the only reason you're here today, sitting under the king's commands, is because of his kindness to you undeservingly, because of a covenant that was made with someone else before the beginning of the world. The lamb that was slain before the beginning of the world. And so many in power like Saul snap and self-destruct. They know how to politic and scheme and manipulate and war, but they don't know how to bless and govern when they get power. There's no real thought of being alive for other people. And so here the strong stooping to the undeserving weak is so powerful. You know why? Because it looks like God. Because it looks like God. And David, he's focused. His top priority to show kindness to a race of people that made his life absolutely miserable, that rejected him, that made him suffer and tried to kill him. And you see, this is the overflow from a heart that realizes it has been the recipient of such undeserved love and grace. I must be a channel for such kindness. Anything less would be a complete waste of life and position and influence. And you see, the only alternative to forgiving is not loving. And you see, we live as fallen people among a race of fallen people. You see, here is this Mephibosheth. He's from royalty, as all of mankind is, made in the image of God, placed in paradise, the Garden of Eden, the crown of God's creation, in line to rule the world, have dominion over all the world, all the fish of the sea and the animals and the birds. And the next minute, you know, his dad, Jonathan, and grandfathers are gone. He's fallen. He's on the run. He's lost it all, and he's told that it's the fault of the true king. And the true king says, will anyone come? Will anyone come? And so Mephibosheth begins his dreaded march back to Jerusalem, certain that God, the king, wants to destroy him. And it's his pedigree that makes him afraid of the king. He's a descendant of a fallen race. But it's exactly the same pedigree that will evoke kindness from the same all-sovereign king. And here he comes into the presence of the king, trembling, terrified, probably even wet his pants. And the king comes up. And now you can almost see tears in David's eyes. This boy actually thinks, I'm going to hurt him. And he lifts his head. And you know what he probably said? You look just like your father, Jonathan. You know, the Bible tells us that when God looks at you, the Father, he sees Jesus, the one who made a covenant on our behalf so that we could stand crippled and forgiven in the presence of the sovereign judge of the universe. And people get shocked when they discover that the king that they feared their entire lives is out to love them. And you see, this searching king is driven by an ancient love. And in the Hebrew, it's called hesed. And it's virtually impossible to translate into English. The Hebrews considered it the highest form of human virtue, that it's way beyond an oath to love, that it's this ancient thing, this thing that we still long for today as modern people, but we've lost the language to express it. We've lost the concepts and the words to define it, but our hearts haven't stopped needing it. An emotion so deeply felt that you have to extend it to someone, that you search for someone to extend it to. And this is a picture of God's heart, the deepest depths of his being on display. This is the gospel painted out in story form, and it's the outworking of Jesus as King. It's fruit, it's the harvest of the souls. We are progressing into the image of Jesus. That's the thing, listen. You and I, our ultimate goal is to progress into the image of Jesus. Romans chapter 8, all things work together for good for those who love God, are called according to his purpose. For he who predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, on and on it goes. What is the ultimate good in life? The ultimate goal, into the image of Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing. As we progress into that image, as God makes those changes in us, as he pours living waters through us that overflow the Holy Spirit, we're like a river. And a river's goal is the sea. And as the river floods towards the sea, it overflows its banks and deposits soil and food and fruits to all along its banks on the way to its destination. That's what you are. You overflow God's character to every life he puts in your path as you head for the goal, Jesus Christ. That's the purpose of every person in here this morning. Everything that God does through you and for you is redemptive. And this searching, ancient love began thousands of years ago when man blew it, man fell, covered himself, and God said, "Where are you, Adam?" You ever play hide and seek with a 2-year-old? Where are you? God knew where he was. We're accepted in the beloved. When we were without strength, Christ died for the ungodly. You see? Mephibosheth is in the king's presence, not because of himself, but because of another. It's the kindness of God that leads to repentance. So he grasps grace. He says, "I'm a dead dog. I can't stand on my 2 feet." That is the first step of the Christian experience, on your face before the King, unworthy, overwhelmed by his grace. And then you find out you're not just accepted, you're his adopted son. You are sitting at God's table, face to face with God as his favorite son. That's the doctrine of adoption. You see? And also ancient love, it binds. It has a word to bind. And yeah, if you remember the movie Out of Africa, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, she said to Robert Redford, "Will you marry me?" And Robert Redford responded, "Do you think a piece of paper would make me love you more?" But the question I ask is, why wouldn't you give her that piece of paper? Why wouldn't you love her enough? Why wouldn't you tie up and bind your fate with the one you claim to love irreversibly? Why wouldn't you give that to someone you love? There is a commitment that doesn't smother love. It comes from God, but it strengthens that love. It makes love powerfully explosive. You know what one of the problems are with living in New York City? Anybody ever talk to who lives in New York City? They don't have any commitments in relationships. And they're all alone in the world of millions and millions of people. And you know, there's nothing more liberating than being in a covenant relationship, knowing that you have people in your life that will do anything for you. There's nothing like being part of a community that sticks together. And you know, at first it looks like limited freedom, but then you get inside that community and it's more freeing than anything you can experience, because there isn't much freedom in uncertainty, in broken relationships, in divorce. You see? And so as all of these things come together, you know, we're watching what's happening here with God and his people. And I also want you to see this as well, that ancient love bestows radical equality. All through this account, David is referred to as the king until he talks face to face with Mephibosheth, and it says David. And so you have this idea of intimacy with the king. It's a love that doesn't just give you a new beginning, but also a new past. Now, the king, David, we're wrapping this up, a picture of God, looks to this impoverished boy, once from royalty and meant for glory and unimaginable riches. This king, David, this representation of God, says to this shameful one, crippled, unable to walk from a fall, I will restore all of your glory. I will restore all of your riches. I will restore your status. You will sit at my table every day, face to face with me, the king, as my favorite son. That, my friends, is your story. And thirdly and lastly, an unending feast. Here comes Mephibosheth. And if you get anything today, it's been a long day because we had all that commotion with Mr. Important over here. But here comes this crippled boy. He's come to the wedding feast of the Lamb. Solomon had something like 22,000 sheep at his table. If you can imagine the opulence, the overflow. But it's also a family dinner with jokes and laughter. So there's royalty and pageantry and closeness and Thanksgiving and mashed potatoes. And, you know, you've got the 2-year-old spraying, you know, cream of wheat all over the place. Why would you want that at your table? Because of parental love. But here comes this cripple. Please get this. Crutches. Feet scraping along the royal palace floor. There's an empty place at the king's table. He plops himself down. He lifts up the tablecloth and he sees Moses is crippled. He sees Paul as crippled. He sees Absalom as crippled. He sees Noah as crippled. That they're all crippled. And then he puts the white, pure, radiant linen tablecloth of the king's table over the marks of his fall, and they're hidden forever. Glorified forever. And he looks up. And he notices an empty seat at the head of the table. And then he hears this. Shh. Shh. It's the king himself, with nail scars in his hands and in his feet, forever united with man in his fall and his glory. And what does he do? He serves you, according to Matthew chapter 12. Who could dream this up? Who could possibly think that your face is on a milk carton in heaven? Who could possibly believe in all of your fallenness that there's a place set for you that heaven is not home for God until you're there, that he misses you every day. And let me tell you, many of you know what it's like to lose a child, or we've had ours kidnapped, and there's a whole story with that. But you know, when you have a child missing and they come back, you don't care what they've done wrong. You just miss them. You miss them. And you say, would you like some cookies? What can I do to be one with you? I don't care what you did wrong. Let me count the freckles on your face. That's God. That's God. He didn't just come as a man for 33 years. He came as a man forever. And we are literally part of his body. And it is apparent that the author of Samuel wants this last image to linger with us. A snapshot, taste buds to the soul. In Isaiah chapter 25, I'll read this for just 2 verses. Speaking of that day, and in this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all people a feast of choice pieces, a feast of wines on the lees, of fat things full of marrow, of well-refined wines on the lees. And he will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over the nations. Listen to this final verse. He will swallow up death forever. And the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. The rebuke of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. The ultimate feast. You know, what's being said here is that the host will be feasting too. From eternity past, he swallows death intended for you and me. And he says to us, take this cup of blessings, which is meant for my son. He will swallow death in your place. A God who has bound his destiny to ours with complete disregard for himself. It's the ancient love that we long for. And you know why we're here? We could be natural enemies. We could have completely opposite interests. But the only reason all of us are here, from various backgrounds, education, races, we're here because we've tasted ancient love. We're here because God has loved us undeservedly. And we want to sing about it. And we long to hunt down Mephibosheths in this world, this wasteland, and bring them to the King's table. Let's have the worship team come up here. Let this linger on the taste buds of your soul. And when you sing these next 2 songs, you sing like your King has just entered the room, and you want to express the deepest part of your gratitude to him. We're going to sing 2 songs. If you'd like, you can come down during the first song and pray with Bob or Debbie. If you have any need for prayer, we'll give you a Bible. If you want a Bible, we don't want your name or join something or your money, but they're there for that. The ushers are going to come down and take up a collection, and that's a huge part of your walk with God. to be generous, to keep the doors open so we can continue to worship our King and glory. Let's worship the Lord.